The White Cat of Drumgunniol by Sheridan Le Fanu. There is a famous story of a white cat with which we all became acquainted in the nursery. I'm going to tell a story of a white cat very different from the amiable and enchanted princess who took that disguise for a season. The white cat of which I speak was a more sinister animal. The traveler from Limerick toward Dublin after passing the hills of Killaloe upon the left as Keeper Mountain rises high in view, finds himself gradually hemmed in, up to the right by a range of lower hills, an undulating plain that dips gradually to a lower level than that of the road interposes, and some scattered hedgerows relieve its somewhat wild and melancholy character. One of the human habitations that send up their films of turf smoke from that lonely plain is the loosely thatched earth-built dwelling of a strong farmer, as the more prosperous of the tenant farming classes are termed, in Munster. It stands in a clump of trees near the edge of a wandering stream, about halfway between the mountains and the Dublin road, and had been for generations tenanted by people named Donovan. In a distant place, desirous of studying some Irish records which had fallen into my hands, and inquiring for a teacher capable of instructing me in the Irish language, a Mr. Donovan, dreamy, harmless, and learned, was recommended to me for the purpose. I found that he had been educated as a Caesar in Trinity College, Dublin. He now supported himself by teaching, and the special direction of my studies, I suppose, flattered his national partialities, for he unbosomed himself of much of his long reserved thoughts and recollections about his country and his early days. It was he who told me this story, and I mean to repeat it as nearly as I can in his own words. I have myself seen the old farmhouse with its orchard of huge moss-grown apple trees. I have looked round at the peculiar landscapes, the roofless, ivied tower that 200 years before had afforded a refuge from raid and rapine, which still occupies its old place in the angle of the Haggard. The bush-grown list that scarcely 150 steps away records the labors of a bygone race, the dark and towering outline of Old Keeper in the background, and the long range of firs and heath-clad hills that form a narrow barrier, with many a line of grey rock and clump of dwarf oak and birch. The pervading sense of loneliness made it a scene not unsuited for a wild and unearthly story, and I could quite fancy how, seen in the grey of wintry morning, shrouded far and wide in snow as in the melancholy glory of an autumnal sunset, or in the chill splendor of a moonlit night, it might have helped to tone a dreamy mind like honest Dan Donovan's to superstition and proneness to the illusions of fancy. It is certain, however, that I never anywhere met with a more simple-minded creature, or one of whose good faith I could more entirely rely. When I was a boy, said he, living at home in Drumgunniol, I used to take my Goldsmith's Roman history in my hand and go down to my favorite seat, the flat stone sheltered by a hawthorn tree beside the little loft, a large and deep pool, such as I have heard called a tarn in England. It lay in the gentle hollow of a field that is overhung toward the north by the old orchard, and being a deserted place was favorable to my studious quietude. One day, reading here as usual, I worried at last and began to look about me, thinking of the heroic scenes I had just been reading of. I was as wide awake as I am at this moment, and I saw a woman appear at the corner of the orchard and walk down the slope. She wore a long, light gray dress, so long that it seemed to sweep the grass behind her, and so singular was her appearance in part of the world where female attire is so inflexibly fixed by custom, that I could not take my eyes off her. Her course lay diagonally from corner to corner of the field, which was a large one, and she pursued it without swerving. When she came near, I could see that her feet were bare, and she seemed to be looking steadfastly upon some remote object for guidance. Her route would have crossed me had the tarn not interposed about 10 or 12 yards below the point at which I was sitting, but instead of arresting her course for the margin of the lough, as I was expected, she went on to, without seeming conscious of its existence, and when I saw her, as plainly as I see you, sir, walk across the surface of the water and pass without seeming to see me, at about the distance I had calculated, I was ready to faint from sheer terror. I was only 13 years old then, and I remember every particular as if it had happened this hour. The figure passed through the gap at the far corner of the field, and there I lost sight of it. I had hardly strength to walk home, and was so nervous and ultimately so ill that for 3 weeks I was confined to the house, and could not bear to be alone for a moment. I never entered that field again, such is the horror with which from that moment every object in it was clothed. Even at this distance of time, I should not like to pass through it. This apparition I connected with the mysterious event and also with the singular liability that has for nearly 8 years distinguished or rather afflicted our family. It is no fancy. Everybody in that part of the country knows all about it. Everyone connected what I had seen with it. I will tell you of it all as well as I can. When I was about 14 years old, this is about a year after the sight I'd seen in the Lough field. We were one night expecting my father home from the fair of Killaway. My mother sat up to welcome him home and I with her, for I liked nothing better than such a vigil. My brothers and sisters and the farm servants, except the men who were driving home the cattle from the fair, were asleep in their beds. My mother and I were sitting in the chimney corner chatting together and watching my father's supper, which was kept hot over the fire. We knew that he would return before the men who were driving home the cattle, for he was riding and told us that he would only wait to see them fairly on the road, then push homeward. At length we heard his voice and the knocking of his loaded whip at the door, and my mother let him in. I don't think I ever saw my father drunk, which is more than most men of my age, from the same part of the country, could say of theirs. But he could drink his glass of whiskey as well as another. And he usually came from fair or market, a little merry and mellow, and with a jolly flush in his cheeks. Tonight he looked sunken, pale, and sad. He entered with the saddle and bridle in his hand, and he dropped them against the wall near the door and put his arms around his wife's neck and kissed her kindly. "Welcome home, Michael," she said, kissing him heartily. "God bless you, Mauverine," he answered, and hugging her again, he turned to me, who was plucking him by the hand, jealous of his notice I was little in light of my age. And he lifted me up in his arms and kissed me, and my arms being about his neck. He said to my mother, "Draw the bolt, Kushla." She did so, and setting me down very dejectedly, he walked to the fire and sat down on a stool, and stretched his feet toward the glowing turf, leaning with his hands on his knees. "Rouse up, Mick, darling," said my mother, who was growing anxious, "and tell me, how did the cattle sell? And did everything go lucky at the fair, or is there anything wrong with the landlord? And what in the world is it that ails you, Mick Jewel?" "Nothing, Molly. The cows sold well, thank God, and there's nothing fell out between me and the landlord, and everything's the same. There's no fault to find anywhere." "Well then, Mickey, since it is so, turn around to your hot supper and eat it, and tell us, is there anything new?" "I got my supper Molly on the way. I can't eat a bit," he answered. "Got your supper on the way, as you know, was waiting for you at home, and your wife sitting up and all," cried my mother reproachfully. "You're taking a wrong meaning out of what I say," said my father. "There's nothing happened that leaves me that I can't eat a mouthful. And I'll not be dark with you, Molly, for sure. It ain't very long I have to be here. And I'll tell you what it was, what I've seen. The White Cat." "The Lord between us and harm," exclaimed my mother in a moment, as pale as a chop fallen as my father. And then, trying to rally with a laugh, she said, "Ha, it's only fun to me you are. Sure, a white rabbit was snared by Sunday night in Grady's wood, and Tig seen a big white rare in the haggard yesterday. 'Twas neither rat nor rabbit, was it? Don't you think I'd have known a rabbit or a rat from a big white cat, with green eyes as big as halfpennies and its back riz up like a bridge, trotting on and across me and reading if I dare stop, to rub its sides against my shins and maybe take a jump and seize my throat, if that's a cat at all and not something worse." As he ended his description in a low tone, looking straight at the fire, my father drew his big hand across his forehead once or twice, his face being damp and shining with the moisture of fear, and he sighed or rather groaned heavily. My mother half relapsed into panic and was praying again and for fear. I too was terribly frightened and on the point of crying, for I knew all about the White Cat. Clapping my father on the shoulder by the way of encouragement, my mother leaned over him, kissing him, and at length began to cry. He was wringing her hands in his and seemed in great trouble. "There was nothing came into the house with me," he asked in a very low tone to me. "There was nothing, Father," I said, "but the saddle and bridle that was in your hand." "Nothing white came at the door with me," he repeated. "Nothing at all," I answered. "So best," said the father. And making the sign of the cross, he began mumbling to himself, for I knew he was saying his prayers. Waiting for a while to give him time for his exercise, my mother asked him where he first saw it. "When I was riding up by the Boreen, the Irish term meaning a little road, such as leads up to a farmhouse, I bethought myself that the man was on the road with the cattle, and no one to look to the horse but myself, so I thought I might as well leave him in the crooked field below. And I took him there, and being cool and not a hair turned, for I rode him easy all the way. When I turned after letting him go, the saddle and bridle being in my hand, that I saw it pushing out of the long grass on the side of the path, and it walked across it in front of me and then back again before me the same way, and sometimes at one side, then at the other, looking at me with them shining eyes, and I consented. I heard it growling at it. It keep beside me as close as ever as you see, till I come up to the door here and knocked and called as you heard me. Nay, what was it? It was so simple an incident that agitated my mother and father and myself, and finally I remembered that rest of the household With its terrible foreboding, it was this that we one and all believed, that my father had received in this encountering the white cat, the warning of his approaching death. The omen had never failed hitherto, it did not fail now, and a week after my father took the fever that was going, and before a month he was dead. My honest friend Dan Donovan paused here. I could perceive that he was praying, for his lips were busy, and I concluded that it was for the repose of the departed soul. In a little while he resumed. It is 80 years now since that omen first attached to my family. 80 years. It is near 90s, near the mark. And I have been spoken to many people in those earlier times who had a distinct recollection of everything connected with it. It happened in this way. My granduncle Connor Donovan had the old farm of Drumgunniol in his day. He was richer than ever my father was, or my father's father either, for he took a short lease of Balragan and made money of it. But money won't soften a hard heart, and I'm afraid my great uncle was a cruel man. A prolific man he was, surely, and that is mostly a cruel man at heart. He drank his share too, and cursed and swore, and he was vexed more than was good for his soul, I'm afraid. At that time there was a beautiful girl, the Colemans, up in the mountains, not far from Capricullen. I am told that there are no Colemans there now at all, and the family's passed away. The famine years made great changes. Ellen Coleman was her name. The Colemans were not rich, but being such a beauty, she might have made a good match. Worse than she did for herself, poor thing, she could not. Con Donovan, my granduncle, God forbid, sometimes in his rambles, saw her at fairs and patterns, and he fell in love with her as who might not. He used her ill. He promised her marriage and persuaded her to come away with him. And after all, he broke his word. It was just the old story. He tired of her and he wanted to push himself in the world. He married a girl of the Collops and had that great fortune. 24 cows, 70 sheep, and 120 goats. He married his married Collope and grew richer than before. And Ellen Coleman died broken-hearted, but that did not trouble the strong farmer much. He would have liked to have had children, but he had none, and this was the only cross he had to bear. For everything else much went as he wished. One night he was returning from the fair of Nanga. A shallow stream at the time crossed the road, and there had thrown a bridge over it. I am told for some time since, and its channel was often dry in summer weather. When it was so, it passes close by the old farmhouse of Drumgunniol, without a great deal of winding. It makes a sort of road where people then use as a shortcut to reach the house by. Into the dry channels there was plenty of light from the moon. My granduncle turned his horse, and when he had reached the 2 ash trees at the mirroring of the farm, he turned his horse short into the river field, intending to ride through the gap at the other end. Under the oak trees he would have been within 100 yards of his door. As he approached the gap, he thought he saw with a slow motion gliding along the ground towards the same point. Now and then, with a soft bound, a white object, which he described as being no bigger than his hat. But what it was he could not see as it moved along the hedge and had disappeared at the point in which he was himself tending. When he reached the gap, the horse stopped short. He urged and coaxed it in vain. He got down to lead it through, but it recoiled, snorted, and fell into a wild, trembling fit. He mounted it again, but its terror continued, and it obstinately resisted his caresses and his whip. It was bright moonlight, and my granduncle was chaffed by the horse's resistance. And seeing nothing to account for it, and being so near home, what little patience he possessed took him, and plying his whip and spur in earnest, he broke into oaths and curses. All of a sudden, the horse sprang through, and Con Donovan, as he passed under the broad branch of the oak, saw clearly a woman standing on the bank beside him, her arms extended, with the hand of which, as he flew by, she struck him a blow upon the shoulder. It threw him forward upon the neck of the horse, which in wild terror reached the door at the gallop, and he stood there quivering and steaming all over. Less alive than dead, my granduncle got in. He told the story at least so much as he chose. His wife did not quite know what to think, but that something very bad had happened, as she could not doubt. He was very faint and ill, and begged that the priest should be sent for with. When they regained him to his bed, they saw distinctly the marks of 5 fingerprints on the flesh of his shoulder, where the spectral blow had fallen. These singular marks, which they said resembled the tint of a hue of a body struck by lightning, remained imprinted on his flesh and were buried with him. When he had recovered sufficiently to talk with the people about him, speaking like a man who at his last hour from a burdened heart and troubled conscience repeated his story, but he did not see at all events know the face of the figure that stood in the gap. No one believed him. He told more about it to the priests and others. He certainly had a secret to tell. He might as well have divulged it frankly, for the neighbors all knew well enough that it was the face of dead Ellen Coleman that he had seen. From that moment my great uncle never raised his head. He was a scared, silent, broken-spirited man. It was early summer then, and at the fall of the leaf in the same year he died. Of course it was a wake such as besmeets a strong farmer, so rich as he. For some reason the arrangements of the ceremonial were a little different from the usual routine. The usual practice is to place the body in the great room or kitchen, as it is called, of the house. In this particular case there was, as I told you, for some reason, an unusual arrangement. The body was placed in a small room that opened upon the greater one. The door of this during the wake stood open. There were candles about the bed and pipes and tobacco on the table and stools for such guests as chose to enter, the door standing open for their reception. The body, having been laid out, was left alone in the smaller room during the preparations for the wake. After nightfall, one of the women, approaching the bed to get a chair to which she had left near it, rushed from the room with a scream, and having recovered her speech at the further end of the kitchen and surrounded by a gaping audience, she said at last, "May I never sin if his face Ben rise up against the back of the bed, and he's staring down into the door, with eyes as big as pewter plates that 'ud be shining in the moon." "Our woman, it is cracked you are," said one of the farm boys, as they termed him, being men of any age you please. "Aye, Molly, don't be talking, woman. This what you consented, going into the dark room and out of the light. Why didn't you take a candle in your fingers, you odd mad? Ya almadon," said one of the female companions. "Candle or no candle, I seen it," insisted Molly. "And what's more, I could at most take my oath I see his arome too, stretching out at the bed along the fire 3 times as long as it should be to take hold of me with that foot." "Nonsense, you fool! What I want? What he want of your foot?" exclaimed one scornfully. "Give me the candle, some of ye's, in the name of God," said old Saul Dolan, that was straight and lean, and a woman that could pry like a saint, like a priest almost. "Give her a candle," agreed all. But whatever they might say, there wasn't one amongst them then that did not look pale and stern enough as they followed Mrs. Doolin, who was praying as fast as her lips could patter, and leading the van to it with a tallow candle, held like a taper in her fingers. The door was half open, as the panic-stricken girl had left it, and holding the candle on high, the better to examine the room, she made a step or so into it. If my granduncle's hand had been stretched upon the floor in the unnatural way described, he had drawn it back again under the sheet that covered him, and tall Mrs. Doolin was in no danger of tripping over his arm as she entered. But she had not gone more than a step or two to her candle aloft when, a drowning face, she suddenly stopped short, staring at the bed, which was now fully in view. "Lord bless us, Mrs. Doolin, ma'am, come back," said the woman next to her, who had fast hold of her dress, or of her coat as they called it, and drawing her backwards with a frightened pluck, while a general recoil among her followers beckoned the alarm which her hesitation had inspired. Whist will ye," said the leader peremptorily. "I can't hear my own ears with the noise you're making, which I've yes, left the cat in here." "And whose cat is it?" she asked, peering suspiciously at a white cat sitting on the breast of the corpse. "Put it away, will you?" she assumed the horror of the profanation. "Many a corpse as I stretched and crossed in the bed, the likes of that I've never seen yet. The man of the house with the brood beast like that mounted on him, like a puka. Lord, forgive me for naming the like in this room. Drive it away, some of ye's out this moment, I tell you." Each repeated the order, but no one seemed inclined to execute it. They were crossing themselves and whispering their conjectures, and misgiving as to the nature of the beast, which was no cat of that house, nor one that they had ever seen before. All of a sudden, the white cat placed itself on the pillow over the head of the body, and having them that place, glared for a time at them over the features of the corpse. It crept softly along the body towards them, growing loud and fiercely as it drew near. Out of the room they bounced in dreadful confusion, shutting the door fast after them, and not a good while did their hardiest venture to peep in again. The white cat was sitting in its old place on the dead man's breast, but this time it crept quietly down the side of the bed and disappeared under it. The sheet, which was spread like a coverlet and hung down nearly to the floor, concealed it from view. Praying, crossing themselves, and not forgetting to sprinkle in holy water, they peeped and finally searched, poking, spade, wattles, pitchfork, and such implements under the bed, but the cat was not to be found, and they concluded that it had made its escape either among their feet as they stood near the threshold. So they secured the door carefully with a hasp and lock, and the door was opened next morning. They found the white cat sitting as it had never been disturbed upon the breast of the dead man. Again occurred very nearly the same scene, which, like a result, only that said that they saw the cat afterwards lurking under a big box in a corner of the outer rooms, where my granduncle kept his leases and papers and his prayer books and beads. Mrs. Doolin heard it growling at her heels whenever she went, and although she could not see it, she could hear it spring on its back of her chair when she sat down, and growl in her ear so she would bounce up with a scream and a prayer, fancying that it was appointed taking her by the throat. And the priest boy, looking round the corner under the branches of the old orchard, saw a white cat sitting under the little window of the room where my granduncle was laid out, and looking out at the four small panes of glass, looking up at the small 4 panes of glass as a cat will watch a bird. The end of it was that the cat was found on the corpse again when the room was visited, and do what they might, whenever the body was left alone, the cat was found again in the same ill-omened contiguity with the dead man, and this continued to the scandal and fear of the neighborhood, until the door was finally opened for the wake. My granduncle was dead, and with all due solemnities buried. I have done with him, but not quite yet with the white cat. No banshee ever was more inalienably attached to a family than this ominous apparition is to mine. But there is this difference. The banshee seems to be animated with an affectionate sympathy with the bereaved family to whom it is hereditarily attached. Whereas this thing has about a suspicion of malice. It is the messenger simply of death. And it takes the shape of a cat, the coldest and they say the most vindictive of brutes. It is indicative of the spirit of his visit. When my grandfather's death was near, although he seemed quite well at the time, he appeared not exactly, but very nearly in the same way in which I told you it showed itself to my father. The day before my Uncle Teague was killed by the bursting of his gun, it appeared to him in the evening and at twilight by the lough in the field, where I saw the woman who walked across the water, as I told you. My uncle was washing the barrel of his gun in the lough. The grass is short there, and there was no cover near it. He did not know how it approached, but the first time he saw it, the white cat was walking close round his feet, in the twilight, with an angry twist of its tail and its green glare in its eyes. And do what he would, it continued walking round and round in him in larger and smaller circles, till he reached the orchard, and there he lost it. My poor Aunt Peg, she married one of the O'Briens near Ula, came to Drumgunniol to go to the funeral of a cousin who had died about a mile away. She died herself, poor woman, only a month after. Coming from the wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, as she got over the stile in the front of Drumgunniol, she saw the white cat at her side, and it kept close beside her, and she ready to grow all the time, faint all the time, till she reached the door of the house, where it made a spring up into the white thorn tree that grows close by. And so it parted from her. And my little brother Jim saw it also. Just 3 weeks later, he died. Every member of our family who dies or takes his death sickness at Drumgunniol is sure to see the white cat. And no one of us who sees it need hope for life long after. That was the White Cat of Drumgunniol. I love this story. I'll give you your cards real quick. Let's see what we have. Your first card is 3 of Swords is reversed. Your next card is 3 of Wands reversed. You want to look out at the future. You're healing from heartbreak. You've got 5 of Cups is reversed. So you are mourning some type of loss or regret something. But it feels like you're going to take some type of action. You've also got the Devil reversed. This is a fated connection and you two will be together. But make sure you heed the call. This is judgment. You're not heeding the call. It's not going to go away just because you ignore it. It's going to come for you, just like the white cat did. And there will be changes. There will be guests at the hall. I did the ash tree. I'll put that on. I think it's already on. Okay, thank you for watching. Put your requests in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.